Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. Thank you, as always, to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you want to sign up and join, of course, you heard it in the intro, but you can go to patreon.com/speakingout. We just added a new reward where we're going to do trainings once a week by Zoom, and that'll be for the 25 and up pricing range.
Right.
So once a month you'll get your own private.
I'm excited
training.
about that,
Yeah.
Jimmy. I'm very excited about it. The trainings are going to be amazing, based on trainings that Jimmy developed from his knowledge, experience, and his interactions. There are no trainings out there like this training, and he's had huge success with these trainings.
And my
It's gonna be
specialty is
amazing.
abuse in plain sight, so
Right.
that's kind of my main focus, which gives us really tangible things. If we know that abuse is happening in front of us, we can actually do something about
Yeah,
it if we know how to
exactly.
recognize it. Because
Exactly.
the abuse, I always say, the abuse that happens in isolation, unless a child discloses, we will never know about that
Right.
abuse.
Exactly
Period.
right.
We can't.
I'm just
because it's
very
in
excited
isolation.
about this tier, this training. Please, if you have an interest, join that tier through Patreon. Tell your friends who may be interested. Also, church leaders, anybody that could be interested. It's the only way you can get this training right now.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of training, for this episode, we want to talk about something that's pretty sensitive, and that is, how do you begin to recognize changes in behavior with your kids? And then what do you do about that? What's the next step or the next steps? And this is a hard one because no parent on planet Earth who cares about their kids wants to acknowledge that there's a shift in behavior that could implicate somebody as an abuser. No parent
Right.
would ever wish that on their child.
Right.
And so what we typically do as parents is we live in this state of denial. And I don't even want to say that it's intentional, because I don't think that it is. I think it's just one of those things where trying to wrap your mind around the idea that your child could have been abused is a really dark, sad, traumatic place to
It
be.
is. And another thing that presses on our minds all of the time is, I know my child would tell. If something happened, I know my child so well that I know my child would tell. Not so, is
Yeah,
it?
statistically, it's just
yeah,
not.
Not so.
That's very unlikely.
It's rare that the child will come, speak to another adult when this is occurring. Very rare, and the reasons are numerous, and we've gone over that many times before. So it's up to us to be educated enough to know what signs to look for.
And this is really tricky for me anyway, because I like things to be black and white. I'm an analytical thinker. I overthink everything. I mean everything. I overthink. And so when you're kind of in this gray area, like, well, I'm not really sure. Like, this could be, but it might not be. For me, that's like this just horrific zone. And I find myself in that zone a lot, where I just second guess myself over and over and over, if there's even a hint of gray. And unfortunately, some of these signs, some people call them telltale signs, and I look at them and I'm like, that's not really so telltale. Sometimes you can't tell. It's things like, I'll just rattle off a few, but, especially with little girls, constant UTIs. That's one, and not to get very personal, and I'm certainly not going to give details, but, when our daughter was little, there were multiple times, not many, but there were a few where she got UTIs.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, that was the first thought that went to my mind was, did something happen at daycare?
Right.
And when we went to the doctor, they said it's incredibly common when children are first learning how to wipe and wipe properly.
Right.
It's common. It's really common to get infected down there. So they assured us, unless there are any other signs,
Right.
the UTI by itself that's not an issue. But it could be an issue.
I was going to say, but it puts us on the alert for other signs, and that's where we need this education.
Yeah, and I think that's why you need to be alert, because, if a child starts behaving strangely around somebody in tandem with a UTI,
Right.
that would be cause for extreme concern in my mind.
Well, absolutely.
And they may or may not, and again, some of these things are so gray. I know that some of my dad's victims, and they've spoken to me about this. They're like, we couldn't wait to hang out with him, to spend time with him, even though he was abusing us. We didn't really know at the time that what he was doing was abuse. We knew it. It was strange and it felt weird.
Yeah.
But we didn't know it was abuse, and so when it was time to go play with him, we would get excited.
That being said,
that's a tricky one.
And I know, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. These little girls, but in our home, there were signs, but not till later. Had I known what to look for, it's possible that maybe one of the girls would have talked to me. There were eating disorders. There was depression. There were suicidal thoughts. There were things like covering up in the family swimming pool with clothing.
Yeah, and those are all signs.
Right.
Those are all
I had
indicators.
No clue what those meant. Depression runs in our family. I thought, okay, they're depressed. Okay. Eating disorders. I knew nothing about eating disorders back in the day. That was a big one because that meant they were trying to be in control each. And when I look back, I can even remember sitting in a choral concert, looking at your dad sitting next to him and saying, I don't understand it. Our girls are beautiful. They're smart. And yet they're standing up on that stage with their heads down, cowering. It was like they had no self-esteem. And I didn't get it. They were told all the time they were beautiful, they were intelligent, they were special. I didn't get it. And of course, he sat there, full well knowing the reason why. But
absolutely,
when you combine all of that together, there were pieces of the puzzle that I had no clue to put together.
Yeah.
No clue.
Yeah, but you start putting those pieces together and they start adding up. And, one of my phrases is math matters. You start doing addition, and at the end of the day, 2 + 2 = 4. And so is the math there? Are there multiple indicators? And it could be the strange behavior. Bedwetting.
Yes. There hasn't been, when a child has been potty trained for a long time, and then
but all of a sudden
it
starts up, or especially if they've seen somebody recently and then the bedwetting begins,
Right.
that's usually a pretty strong indicator that at least something traumatic has happened. Again, not always, but typically.
Well, language. A lot of children, and I put a disclaimer here that this could be very sensitive to a lot of people, but a lot of children who are molested are forced to look at porn. They're
Mm-hmm.
forced to do acts that are not childlike,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and their language will sometimes talk. Uh, we call it dirty talk, and we'll wonder where in the world did that come from.
Mm-hmm.
Or when they're playing with doll babies or something, or playing doctor, you'll
Mm-hmm.
notice little, signs that why in the world did they do that? Where they learn that from?
Right.
I can think back, on so many little telltale things like that did nothing clicked.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing clicked. Now it would though. Now it
Yeah.
would click.
So you can have overdressing, like you said, wearing baggy clothes and trying to cover up, always being self-conscious.
Yes.
There can be overdressing or there can be underdressing.
Right.
There can
It
be
could be
kind
just
of
the opposite. Right.
hypersexualized,
Yep.
where that's just kind of what they're used to
Right.
and what they've been taught and conditioned to do. You have, like you said, the vocabulary that's too mature for their age,
Right.
too knowledgeable about sexual things. You can have, like you mentioned, the eating disorders. You can have when certain people, and for me, this is kind of a strong one, a strong indicator, but when there is somebody who they're uncomfortable around, their demeanor changes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think
That's
the
a
thing to
big
look
one.
for is that it's not like this subtle thing. And I think about drowning. We think of drowning as, well, I'm going to keep an eye on the water and I'm going to look for the person who's yelling for help and
Yeah.
splashing and, making a big scene. That's not how 99% of drownings happen. 99% of drownings are completely silent and calm.
You're right. You're
So,
right.
it's being trained to look for subtleties. Lifeguards will tell you this. When they're looking out in the water, they're constantly scanning, having people accounted for, knowing where everybody's head is, and then being able to recognize, did
Right.
that head go under? Did that head disappear? And that's what, we had a lifeguard when we were at camp, and this woman had a talk with the kids, and she was like, my number one rule is don't go down and sit on the bottom of the pool
Oh yeah.
or go under the water and just kind of float there. She said, because I'm going to take that as the number one indicator that you are in absolute distress. She said, I'm going to jump in.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to pull you out of the water. She said, if you're in trouble, you're going to thank me. If you're not in trouble, you're not going to like me.
I get it. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
these subtleties like that too, I think what we expect is somebody's going to get really awkward or rigid or, start vomiting or something if they're around somebody that they're uncomfortable with. But that's not really the case. I think more what we should look for are little subtleties, like does their demeanor change? And can we identify these subtleties where all of a sudden now they're mopey when they weren't mopey before? It's not like they're going to just panic and
No.
cling to your side.
No.
In some instances they might,
Right.
but I think more typically it's going to be a little subtle shift in their demeanor, and they're going to try to hide their feelings. They're not going to try to draw attention to
I was
it.
going to say no, and you're right. Also, do they shun certain acts of not attention, affection? That's the word I want. Often, a child who is being abused will get startled if someone goes to touch them or hug them. And I'm talking about younger children and can go into teen years actually
Right.
when this happens. But they will startle, or they will freeze, or they will, and I always taught you kids, you don't tell adults, you don't talk back to adults or anything. I should not have said that, because as I think back, the girls had very definite um, perimeters. They did not like being touched.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. They didn't
Yeah.
like other people hugging them, touching them. They hated it. They
Yeah.
just hated it. Now I know why.
Yeah.
But I didn't know to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
Did not know to look for that.
So these are some of those subtleties, again, that some of them are black and white. Some of them have a lot of gray. Probably most of them have a lot of gray. But we need to be able to know our child,
Right.
and be able to pick up on these things. Conversations. When they talk about certain people, do they kind of go into an avoidance mode and not share any details? Um, some kids just don't talk a lot. Some kids are not detail oriented.
Right.
Other kids
Right.
will tell you every single detail, and it'll take them 9 years to tell a story. But if you have a kid who takes 9 years to tell a story, and they like drawing out details, but then when somebody else is mentioned, they completely change. There's a shift,
You'll know
and now all of a sudden they're not giving
something
details.
happened. Right.
Pay attention to those things. Those things matter. And again, if there are all kinds of things that are adding up, do the math.
I love what you said, and what we have in our fruits. What do I want to say? Our fruits tool. There you go. Couldn't think of the right word. I was trying to think what word here. Where it says, you put a line down the middle, and you put with one side here, what do you see? One side here, how do you think it should be? You check off the list and see, you do the math and see if there are more than 2 or 3 on that side that are giving you red alerts. What do you do, Jimmy, as a parent? What do we do?
And
because that's a big question. I would not have known what to do had I suspected. I would have had no clue.
And some of the obvious ones that we didn't mention are like, blood spots in the underwear. Things that there's a clear indication that there was some kind of trauma.
Right.
And of course, violence, black and blue, or a kid that's completely shut down. And, those are some of the really telltale signs that those are painfully obvious. But for those, that's an immediate trip to the police. Immediate.
Right.
No questions asked. For some of the others, like just the shifts in behavior that you start noticing over time, I think first and foremost, we talked about this a little bit earlier today, don't ask certain questions, as tempting as it is. You don't want to say something like, is somebody abusing you? Because even something like that, if they are being abused, you're really, really going to taint any evidence and any chance of getting a conviction.
Right.
So you really have to tread lightly, and you can ask open-ended questions. How was your day?
Right.
Did anything happen today that, I kind of noticed that you're withdrawn. Did anything happen today? And just kind of leave those open-ended questions where you're not asking, were you abused? That's a horrible thing, first of all, to ask a kid.
Right.
And secondly,
Oh, yeah.
as far as an investigation, it's just not a good idea. So,
Well, that can trip up anything in the court system. We were told that immediately
yeah,
when we went and reported your dad.
yeah.
You can't ask point blank questions like that.
So I would say, first of all, be available, be approachable, and ask open-ended questions. How was your day? Was there anything that happened that upset you? Don't badger your kid. If your kid says no and you keep badgering, maybe there really wasn't something, and they're just having an off day,
A bad
and that's
spell.
okay. That happens to all of us, including kids. Um,
The frustrating part, Jimmy, as we're talking here, is the not knowing for sure.
mm-hmm,
And I get emails weekly from parents, mothers. I've never had one from a father, but mothers who are separated from their husbands or divorced. They have joint custody and they begin noticing changes. Now, of
mm-hmm,
course, is some of these very physical changes in their children. It could be depression from mom and dad separating.
mm-hmm.
Uh, that's possible. It could be bedwetting started up because of them grieving the
Or
loss
they
of
feel responsible that the
or
parents
right.
divorced.
It could be any of those things, but it could also be abuse of
Yeah.
some sort. And a lot of parents who contact me have been abused emotionally by the husband slash
Mm-hmm.
father of the children or the stepfather or the uncle or the grandparent, whatever. So I get a lot, believe it or not, a lot of my messages are my child doesn't want to go see grandma and grandpa because they don't want to be near grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why. Is that a telltale sign? They'll say, is that a sign of something?
And again, that's kind of that gray area. Maybe, maybe
All
not.
right.
But I think that's where open-ended questions need to really happen. And again, you may get nothing out of your kid, even if abuse is happening. But you still need to ask those questions. See how your kid responds. Is there anybody who, again, don't say, does grandpa make you feel uncomfortable?
Right.
A better question is there anybody who makes you uncomfortable? I noticed that when we bring you over here, you don't want to go. Is there anybody
Yeah.
who makes you feel uncomfortable
Right.
or does anything to make you feel uncomfortable?
Or says anything to make
Or
you
says
feel
anything to make
right.
you feel uncomfortable, right? Because there could be verbal abuse that's going on. And then I would say if you have multiple indicators, so to speak, that would be, if it were me, that would be a trip to the police station, and I would ask specifically to talk to the sex crimes detective, because people who don't ever deal with sex crimes are going to be like, that's normal kid behavior.
It's out of their league. I know I went to our school counselor about the girls with the eating disorder and the depression and whatnot. I also went to our family doctor, and both kind of sloughed it off as, well,
Because they weren't trained.
you come from a big family. They probably feel left out a lot. There's a lot of pressure to keep up with their grades in school. All kids go through this when they, teenage years are hard. Everything but what they just didn't spot it, didn't
Yep.
catch it. So I agree 1000%. Go to someone who's trained in that area.
And I would say too, if you go to somebody and they kind of brush it off, or they say, well, probably what's happening is, and then they just seem like a know-it-all. To me, that's the first indicator that they don't know
Wrong
what they're
person,
talking about.
yeah, you
If they
got
act
it.
like they're a know-it-all,
Right.
and kind of brush you off and dismiss it, I would go to somebody else and keep going to somebody until you find somebody who at least takes it seriously. And I'm not saying find somebody until somebody says your kid was abused.
No.
Not at all. Find somebody who takes it seriously. If a kid is uncomfortable, and a kid is losing sleep and wetting the bed and covering up and has no self-esteem and whatever it is, if there are all these indicators here, that's a pretty serious thing, and it should be treated seriously.
And if it's not abuse of some sort, it's something going on.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I would start with that and just keep it probably in the front of your mind. I was going to say the back of your mind, but I would keep it in the front of your mind, just the possibility that abuse could have happened. I know it's not a place that people want to go. It's, when it's your own kid, you really will find ways. It's funny how the brain works, but you'll find ways to kind of talk yourself out of it and be like, well, my kid's not really that depressed. and you'll eventually talk yourself
well,
out
if
of
you
it.
have somebody telling you, well, that's a kid thing. They're going through a rough transition, going from 12 to 14. That's a time of just transition, with friends, everything. I'm thinking back in our own lives when there was a statement made to me by one of your sisters who said to me, and it was so painfully hurtful because I, of course, was not educated. But after your dad was arrested and incarcerated, she said, "Didn't you notice how I would cling to you and scream to go with you when
Hmm.
you would even go grocery shopping and all?" Well, all of you kids did that. You all wanted to go with me
Right.
because
Right.
it was fun. And I was always get you kids a little treat. And that was our time, so to
Yeah.
speak, together. So my answer was, I really didn't. And she was just frustrated with me. She said, "But, Mom, I would scream and hold
Hmm.
on to you that I
That's what I mean
wanted."
about that gray area.
Yeah,
It's one of those things that
totally. Yeah.
it's
It's
not as easy as
tough.
saying, oh well,
No.
and that's the frustrating thing with some of the trainings that I've been to on sexual abuse, and well, I mean really any kind of abuse, but they're like, here are the red flag behaviors. Here are
No.
indicators that your kid might have been abused. If you see these signs, report it. If you have any question, just report it. Well, that's not how real life works. It's not that. First of all, it's not that
It's
clear.
not black
Almost
and
never
white. Right.
is it that clear. Secondly, if you walk into a police station, if you just walk in cold turkey and you say, my kid has restless nights, my kid is wearing baggy shirts, and my kid is wetting the bed, they're going to be like, oh, okay. That's why it's important to talk to somebody who's a sex crime
Right.
detective and give as much detail as possible and give a timeline and document things.
I was
When you
going to
see
say,
things that are happening,
documenting things is so vitally
because our
important.
memories are terrible,
So,
I'm telling
yeah.
you. Even
Yep.
people with the best memories, our memories are very fallible.
And I'm
And
going
it's
to put a
important to.
plug in again, Jimmy, for the training, that
Hmm.
training tier. Jimmy will be teaching us about abuse in plain sight. And often our eyes miss what's right in front of us, what's happening right in front of us,
Hmm.
because that's how we're trained to only see a very limited
And our
vision.
brain's not expecting it. Our
Our
brain
brain,
will not see
right.
what it doesn't expect to
Oh,
see.
I'm very pumped up about these trainings. Very, very excited for them because I think it's going to open our minds and our eyes so wide that we'll be able to see more clearly.
Yeah. So I guess I'll end on this note. It's kind of piggybacking off of what you said too. Um, I'm morbid. I'm just going to throw that out there. So, as part of kind of thinking about abuse and just the way the human mind works and how we miss things, that's kind of my fascination because we all missed it.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about us that makes us miss things that happen right in front of us? I watch documentaries on plane crashes because they fascinate me, because almost every plane crash can be attributed to a large degree to human error. Even with mechanical failures that happen where a plane could easily land, it can be attributed to human error.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one that I watched not that long ago. And these pilots, it was a routine flight. It was actually a boring flight, which is routine. They were coming in on approach. They were just about to touch down. I think they were at like 1,500 feet. And they got a wind shear warning that went off in the cockpit.
Okay.
And so the procedure is for the pilot to automatically request a go around, and he'll hit the throttle, go back up to a ceiling of 3,000 feet, and then level off,
Okay.
because 3,000 is the maximum. It's the maximum height for you to be able to make in one swoop, to be able to make a landing
Oh,
to come in back
okay.
again. So anyway, long story short, there was like this chain of disaster after disaster after disaster, and the pilot was barking commands to the co-pilot, and the co-pilot wouldn't respond. He was completely blank, and so the pilot assumed that the co-pilot heard the command and did what he requested him to do,
boy.
and he wasn't. And then the co-pilot started pushing buttons, and without calling them out.
Oh, wow.
He was just like he pulled the flaps, and that was like a detrimental thing. They overshot. He pulled up. They way overshot the 3,000 mark, and it just like they were fighting each other in the cockpit. And finally, the pilot got really frustrated, and he called command of the whole cabin. And he said, you can hear him in the voice, the cockpit recorder. He said, enough. Stop touching buttons. He said, my plane. And what should have been just such a simple routine thing that they've been trained for, and this was a really well-seasoned pilot, ended up almost crashing the airplane.
Wow.
And they barely recovered the aircraft. And,
That's frightening.
and so they said, like, the biggest thing that they attributed this to was the co-pilot wasn't expecting a wind shear warning. And when it happened, I forget the term for it. The pilots have a term for this, but it puts the brain into this shock mode where you literally, there's so much going on that you don't hear or comprehend anything, and you don't remember any of it.
Wow.
So when you come back at the end of it, you have no recollection whatsoever of even anybody talking to you, of pushing buttons. Like, there's zero recollection of that. This is what happens with abuse in plain sight. You're not expecting it to happen, and the brain it gets tripped for a second. And abusers know this, and magicians know this. They make a living off of it. They trip your brain for that split second, and that's when all the magic happens.
We're seeing it, but we're not. So
It's happening right in front of you.
Happening right-
And your brain cannot see it. It just can't do it.
And how many stories, Jimmy, have you and I heard from survivors of abuse that my abuser was abusing me right in front of my mom, right in front of my parents, right in front of my grandparents, right in church, right in the doctor's office, and on and on and on we go. Larry Nasser, how, we can think of. So I'm just very appreciative of the training you've put together, very appreciative for what we're going to be trained in. Please, people, if you have an interest in this, please do sign up for that tier. You will not want to miss it. The information we gave you today is very sketchy. It's not complete. It's a beginning.
And there's a lot of gray in it. And that's it's the frustrating thing.
Yes.
But, that is what it is. But, yeah, that would definitely be my recommendation, is if you have all these little things adding up that are serious enough to create anxiety in your child, that's the first sign. One, that something's not right, and two, that you need to go talk to somebody. Somebody who really knows what they're talking about.
Right.
And that could be a child psychologist. It doesn't have to be. Maybe you don't feel like it's reportable at the time. Talk to a child psychologist, somebody who specifically deals with sexual abuse trauma or any kind of abuse trauma, and just get some feedback. Don't just assume that all is good, and move on.
Yes.
So, all right, patrons and everybody else, thank you for tuning into this episode, and we will catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the rewards our patrons receive.